For thousands of years, humans have invented punishments so bizarre, so irrational, and so horrifying that they feel less like justice and more like a glitch in our species' sanity. From kingdoms that executed people for sneezing at the wrong time to empires that believed torture could purify the soul, history is filled with traditions so dumb they almost feel unreal. Today we're diving into the 50 most absurd, terrifying, and downright unbelievable execution and punishment rituals ever recorded. Buckle up, this gets dark fast. Scaphism in ancient Persia was engineered to stretch human suffering beyond imagination. The victim was trapped between two wooden boats, force-fed milk and honey, until violent diarrhea and vomiting attracted insects. Left floating on stagnant water, flies and worms burrowed into open flesh while the person remained conscious for days. Bodies rotted while still alive, the sun blistered skin, and every hour became a slow unraveling of sanity. It wasn't justice, just a meticulous ritual of psychological and biological destruction. Lingqi, or death by 1,000 cuts, in imperial China was designed not only to kill, but to disgrace. The condemned was tied to a wooden frame while the executioner sliced off small portions of flesh in a choreographed sequence meant to prolong awareness. Sometimes hundreds or thousands of cuts were made before death. Families suffered collective shame, and the body was left mutilated to deny spiritual wholeness. It was punishment turned into a public performance of absolute state domination. Medieval Europe's sawing execution involved hanging the victim upside down, ensuring blood kept flowing to the brain so consciousness lasted longer. A large saw was pushed downward between the legs, following the body's central bone structure like a grim guide. Crowds watched as the process advanced slowly toward the chest, often taking hours. Authorities used this for crimes like treason because the horror created unforgettable fear. It was less about death and more about forcing the community to witness raw human ruin. The breaking wheel used in France and the Holy Roman Empire reduced a person piece by piece. The condemned was tied to a large wheel while executioners shattered limbs with iron clubs in a precise order: arms, legs, ribs, saving the spine for last to preserve consciousness. Sometimes they were woven into the wheel's spokes and raised on poles for birds to feed on. The circular shape symbolized eternal punishment, turning execution into a ritual statement about divine and royal authority. The Assyrian Empire weaponized flaying to terrorize entire regions. Victims were tied to pillars while their skin was peeled off in strips, using bronze knives, executioners carefully avoiding vital arteries to keep them alive longer. Skins were nailed to walls as warnings. Kings like Ashur-nasir-pal II recorded these acts proudly in stone inscriptions. It wasn't simply punishment, it was psychological warfare. Neighboring kingdoms surrendered after hearing of cities lined with human hide, where suffering became a political language carved in flesh. Elephant crushing in ancient India, Sri Lanka, and Siam showcased absolute royal power. War elephants were trained not just to kill, but to execute with choreography, sometimes crushing limbs one by one, sometimes dragging the victim before delivering the final step. In some courts, elephants were instructed to toy with the condemned, emphasizing the ruler's control over life and nature. Foreign travelers wrote that few sights compared to the terror of a massive, intelligent creature delivering a slow, deliberate death. Stoning, seen in ancient Near Eastern societies and early Islamic legal traditions, relied on collective violence. The condemned was partially buried or tied upright, then struck with stones intentionally chosen to be medium-sized, small enough to avoid instant death, large enough to inflict brutal damage. Dozens participated, dispersing responsibility. The victim often died from internal bleeding or skull fractures after agonizing minutes or hours. The true cruelty was psychological. The community itself became the executioner, transforming punishment into shared moral theater. The brazen bull of ancient Sicily was a bronze torture device shaped like a massive bull. Victims were locked inside, and fires were lit beneath, turning the chamber into a metal oven. Ingenious acoustic tubes converted their screams into bull-like roars for spectators, blending spectacle with suffering. Smoke billowed from the nostrils as the flesh cooked inside. Ironically, legend holds that the tyrant who commissioned it, Phalaris, was later killed in the very same bull when his reign collapsed. Keel hauling, used mainly by the Dutch Navy, forced sailors beneath a ship's barnacle-covered hull, guaranteeing shredded skin and broken bones. Bound by ropes, the condemned was dragged from one side of the ship to the other, often swallowing seawater and blood as barnacles tore into flesh. Some drowned. Survivors were permanently disfigured. It wasn't just punishment, it was maritime terror, reminding the crew that the sea itself could become a weapon. The ship became judge, executioner, and unforgiving arena all at once. Burning at the stake in medieval Europe was rarely a quick death. Executioners often used damp wood to prolong agony, creating thick smoke that suffocated before flames consumed flesh. Some regions offered mercy by strangling the victim first, but many faced fire entirely conscious. Crowds viewed the ritual as spiritual purification, believing flames cleansed the soul of heresy. The spectacle reinforced religious authority, turning a human being's final moments into public affirmation of doctrine through agonizing, slow disintegration. In ancient Rome, poenaculae punished parricides by sewing them inside a leather sack with a dog, monkey, snake, and rooster, then throwing the bundle into a river. The chaos inside the sack was deliberate. Biting, scratching, suffocation, panic. Romans believed killing one's parent violated cosmic order, so the condemned deserved a death stripped of dignity and identity. The mixture of animals symbolized madness and disorder, ensuring the victim's final moments were frantic, painful, and spiritually humiliating before drowning ended everything. Vlad the Impaler of Wallachia perfected impalement to amplify terror. Victims were forced onto long wooden stakes inserted through the rectum or vagina, emerging near the shoulder or mouth. Stakes were rounded, not sharp, to avoid quick death, letting the body slide slowly downward for hours or days. Forests of impaled corpses lined roads to intimidate enemies. Travelers described the air thick with decay and groans. Vlad used the method not just to punish, but to sculpt entire landscapes of fear. Ancient Japan practiced ishikozume, burying criminals or adulterers up to the waist before villagers hurled stones until death. Unlike full stoning, victims remained upright, forced to watch faces of those killing them. Stones were chosen carefully, large enough to bruise and fracture, rarely large enough to kill instantly. Samurai-era records show the ritual doubled as public purification, restoring honor to families and villages. The slow collapse of the victim, trapped and defenseless, transformed punishment into a communal cleansing ceremony drenched in symbolic cruelty. In medieval Norway and Iceland, Blood Eagle was a legendary execution described in some sagas. The victim's back was cut open, ribs separated from the spine, and lungs pulled out to resemble wings. Whether fully historical or stylized, accounts agree it represented ultimate vengeance, performed on oathbreakers or enemies. The person supposedly remained conscious during the process, experiencing unimaginable pain as air-filled exposed lungs. Its power came from psychological intimidation, demonstrating that betrayal warranted a death that rewrote the victim's body into a grotesque symbol. The Aztecs used heart extraction during religious ceremonies dedicated to gods like Huitzilopochtli. Victims were laid on stone slabs held by priests, and their chests sliced open with obsidian blades. The beating heart was lifted toward the sky as an offering, believed to fuel cosmic balance and prevent the sun from dying. Bodies were sometimes thrown down pyramid steps, limbs later consumed ritually. It wasn't viewed as cruelty but sacred duty, yet from a human perspective it remains one of history's most intense and intimate executions. In 17th century England, hanged, drawn, and quartered was reserved for high treason. The condemned was dragged to the gallows, partially hanged until near death, then disemboweled while conscious. Genitals were removed, entrails burned before their eyes, and the body finally quartered into 4 parts. Heads were displayed on spikes across London as warnings. The ritual emphasized betrayal against the crown as the worst imaginable crime, demanding a punishment that shredded the body and identity of the offender in front of crowds. In Cambodia, under the Khmer Rouge, flagpole execution involved tying victims to tall poles, while soldiers pulled ropes to hoist and slam bodies repeatedly onto the ground. Some were lifted head first to break skulls gradually. This method required few tools, matching the regime's brutal efficiency. The intention wasn't spectacle but silence, leaving no bullets wasted and no witnesses alive. Survivors remembered the thud of bodies hitting dirt as one of the era's most haunting sounds, a reminder of violence engineered through crude repetition. In ancient Sparta, infants deemed weak or deformed were discarded at Mount Taygetus. Elders examined newborns, and those considered unfit for military life were taken to a chasm called apothetai and left to die from exposure. Although framed as preserving Spartan strength, the practice blurred justice, eugenics, and ritualized abandonment. The mountain became a silent judgment chamber where societal ideals of perfection decided survival. The cruelty wasn't in violence, but in the cold institutional belief that weakness deserved no chance at life. During the Spanish Inquisition, strappado suspensions dislocated shoulders and tore muscles without spilling blood. The victim's hands were tied behind the back and attached to a rope, then hoisted until joints ripped. Sometimes weights were added to intensify agony. Because it left few visible marks, authorities considered it ideal for extracting confessions. Records show prisoners fainting repeatedly, revived only to be lifted again. The method turned the body's own structure into a torture device, slowly unraveling its architecture one tendon at a time. In ancient Tibet, criminals were sometimes punished with sky burial reversal, a twisted inversion of a sacred funerary rite. Instead of offering corpses to vultures after death, the condemned were tied to high rocks while still alive, left for birds to tear apart. Monastic records describe this as punishment for extreme crimes like sacrilege. Death came slowly through blood loss, shock, and exposure. The act corrupted a holy tradition, weaponizing nature's scavengers to show that violating spiritual law meant forfeiting even the dignity of death. In medieval Russia, burying alive in walls punished adulteresses and certain religious offenders. The condemned were placed inside partially built monastery walls, given a tiny opening for air, then sealed brick by brick until darkness swallowed everything. Some survived days, hearing chants from nearby halls, while slowly suffocating. Chronicles describe nuns forced to listen as scratching faded behind stone. The punishment symbolized permanent moral erasure, turning a living human into part of the building, their final breaths absorbed into cold, silent architecture. Ancient Rome practiced damnatio ad bestias, throwing criminals, Christians, and prisoners of war into arenas with lions, leopards, and bears. The execution wasn't just death. It was entertainment engineered for maximum spectacle. Victims were often unarmed, forced to watch gates open as starving animals charged. Sometimes they were tied to stakes or smeared with blood to provoke attacks. The Colosseum echoed with screams drowned by roaring crowds, turning human suffering into state-sponsored theater that reinforced imperial power through orchestrated public annihilation. In 15th century Burma, crocodile pit execution involved tossing criminals into deep pits filled with half-starved crocodiles. The reptiles didn't kill instantly. They thrashed, dragged, and tore limbs apart while victims struggled in muddy water. Royal chronicles note that certain rulers treated this as both punishment and spectacle, inviting nobles to watch how long the condemned lasted. Sometimes multiple prisoners were thrown in to test the animal's aggression. The method transformed nature's predators into judicial tools, merging monarchy, fear, and ecological brutality. In medieval Hungary, Iron Maiden of Nuremberg, though debated historically, was believed to trap victims inside a sarcophagus lined with steel spikes that pierced non-vital organs. The door closed slowly, ensuring the person remained conscious while blood drained into basins. Even if later exaggerations embellished its use, written accounts show rulers admired its psychological power. The terror came from anticipation, seeing the metal figure, hearing the hinges creak, realizing escape was impossible. Whether torture or symbol, it embodied fear molded into iron. Ancient Egypt sometimes punished traitors with desert abandonment, leaving them naked, tied, and coated with oil under the scorching sun. Sandstorms flayed skin, insects burrowed into wounds, and dehydration caused hallucinations long before death. Egyptians viewed the desert as a spiritual boundary where the ordered world ended and chaos began. Sending someone into it alive symbolized erasing them from society and the afterlife. Some died within hours, others lingered days, their bodies eventually swallowed by shifting dunes without burial or remembrance. In medieval Germany, the heretic's fork immobilized the neck with a metal-pronged collar placed between the chest and chin. If the victim's head drooped from exhaustion, the spikes pierced flesh. Bound upright, they endured sleeplessness, muscle collapse, and slow blood loss. Inquisitors favored it because it forced confessions without overt mutilation. Victims stood in agonizing stillness, unable to cry out or rest, trapped between breath and pain. The fork's cruelty lay in its simplicity, suffering created not by violence but by impossible restraint. The Mongol Empire famously avoided spilling royal blood, so crushing under carpets became a political execution. Nobles accused of treason were wrapped in heavy carpets and trampled by horses or wrestlers. Bones shattered silently beneath layers of fabric, ensuring no noble blood touched the earth. Chroniclers note the method was swift yet terrifying, as victims suffocated while hearing hooves pounding above. The ritual preserved spiritual taboos while delivering absolute punishment, demonstrating the empire's ability to kill without violating its own sacred customs. In colonial America, pressing to death, known as peine forte et dure, forced suspects to lie beneath increasing weights of stones or metal slabs until they confessed or died. Most lasted hours or days, ribs cracking slowly under pressure. The most famous case, Giles Corey of Salem, endured silent agony, refusing to plead so his land couldn't be seized. Witnesses described his body flattening, blood seeping from ears, and his final words demanding more weight. The method weaponized gravity itself as relentless, crushing judgment. In ancient Korea's Joseon dynasty, poisoned hemlock tea executed nobles convicted of treason. Unlike common criminals, elites were given a dignified death. Yet the poison caused muscle paralysis, burning throats, and slow respiratory collapse. Scholars recorded final conversations as victims sipped the lethal brew while surrounded by officials documenting every breath. The ritual blended courtesy and cruelty, a calm room, polite protocol, and a body shutting down cell by cell. It was execution disguised as ceremony, where dignity masked suffocating decay. In 19th century China, caging execution confined criminals inside tiny wooden cages hung publicly for days. Victims were unable to stand or lie down, joints dislocating as their bodies collapsed inward. Hunger, thirst, and infection accelerated deterioration. Some cages were raised high so birds could peck at wounds. Others were placed in marketplaces for villagers to witness slow decline. Officials viewed it as a deterrent harsher than immediate death, punishment through immobilization, humiliation, and the unbearable awareness that the body itself had become a prison. In ancient Ethiopia, cliff casting punished traitors by throwing them from high escarpments like Amba Geshen. Victims weren't simply pushed, they were bound, blindfolded, and forced to listen to priests chanting final condemnations before being hurled into the abyss. The fall didn't always kill instantly. Many landed on rocky ledges, broken but alive, left for vultures and hyenas. The punishment symbolized rejection from the kingdom itself, exiled from earth, sky, and community in a single catastrophic plunge into emptiness. In medieval France, boiling alive executed coin forgers and poisoners. A massive cauldron was filled with oil, tar, or water, then heated while the condemned stood nearby, forced to watch bubbles form. They were lowered slowly, ensuring skin blistered, peeled, and separated before unconsciousness. Chronicles describe screams echoing across town squares as crowds witnessed flesh turning white, then red, then black. The method was chosen for crimes considered corruptive, symbolizing that those who tainted society deserved to be physically cooked into nothingness. Among certain Pacific Island tribes, shark offering execution involved tying offenders to wooden rafts and pushing them into shark-rich waters. Warriors slashed their legs first, allowing blood trails to attract predators. The ritual was both judicial and spiritual. Sharks were seen as guardians and judges. Victims sometimes lasted minutes, sometimes seconds, depending on the currents. Songs were chanted as the ocean carried the raft away. The final moments blended terror and sacred symbolism as nature delivered the verdict with ruthless efficiency. In ancient Byzantium, blinding with hot irons punished political rivals, ensuring they could never rule. Captives were restrained while red-hot metal rods were pressed against the eyes, melting tissue instantly. Some emperors ordered partial blinding, one eye destroyed, one left weak, so victims lived in constant disorientation. Historical letters describe the smell of burning flesh and the screams echoing in palace corridors. The intent wasn't death, but permanent removal from power, transforming ambitious rivals into helpless reminders of imperial dominance. In ancient Persia and later India, tongue-tearing punished liars, blasphemers, and spies. Executioners used iron tongs to rip the tongue from the mouth in one brutal pull, severing muscles and arteries. Victims rarely survived long due to bleeding and choking, but the message was symbolic. Those who misused speech died through speech itself. Some records mention tongues displayed at city gates as warnings. The punishment targeted identity, silencing not just a voice but the ability to express humanity in any form. In medieval China, rat torture placed a metal bowl containing rats onto the victim's abdomen. Hot coals were placed on top, forcing the rats to escape downward, clawing and burrowing through living flesh. Officials used it to extract confessions, believing the terror of feeling animals tearing inward broke resistance quickly. Victims thrashed against restraints as the creatures dug deeper. It was a psychological and physical nightmare, execution by fear, heat, and instinct, where survival depended on how long the body could endure internal violation. The ancient Celts practiced wicker man sacrifice, binding offenders inside giant woven structures shaped like humans. The figures were filled with hay and set aflame during religious festivals. Some accounts claim victims were chosen as offerings to gods for good harvests or military victory. Flames climbed rapidly, lighting the night sky as trapped bodies screamed inside burning cages. Whether exaggerated or fully historical, the symbolism remained powerful, justice delivered through ritual immolation, merging punishment, spirituality, and spectacle into one terrifying cultural memory. In 16th century Thailand, bronze elephant torture punished high treason. A heated bronze statue of an elephant was used as a seat. The condemned was tied upon it while the metal burned through skin, muscle, and bone. Some rulers intensified the torment by pouring oil down the victim's back. Executioners recited royal decrees while the person writhed on the smoking figure. The symbolism was clear. Betrayal burned away under the weight of imperial power, executed through a mythical creature made of fire and punishment. During the Congo Free State atrocities under King Leopold II, hand amputation was enforced on villages failing rubber quotas. Soldiers severed right hands as proof bullets weren't wasted. Severed hands piled in baskets became horrific symbols of colonial rule. Some victims bled to death, others lived mutilated, unable to work, ensuring further punishments. Children weren't spared. Missionaries documented corpses with missing limbs scattered near roads. It wasn't justice, it was systematic terror disguised as discipline, where a single hand became currency of brutality. Ancient Rome used crucifixion for slaves, rebels, and criminals, stretching victims on wooden crosses where they suffered days of slow suffocation. Nails or ropes held limbs apart, making every breath a battle as the diaphragm collapsed. Heat, insects, thirst, and exhaustion slowly dismantled the body. Romans placed crucifixions along roads to maximize humiliation and deterrence. The punishment wasn't meant to kill quickly. It forced the condemned to participate in their own demise, lifting themselves painfully just to delay inevitable collapse into death. In medieval India, red-hot iron branding execution punished thieves and traitors by heating massive iron plates until glowing, then pressing them onto the victim's chest and face. The searing metal fused skin instantly, melting tissue and bone while spectators watched smoke rise from the body. Sometimes multiple brands were applied until the person collapsed from shock. Kings used this as a public demonstration of control, marking the condemned permanently before death, ensuring their final screams echoed through markets as unforgettable warnings of royal authority. In ancient Babylon, river ordeal determined guilt through divine judgment. The accused was thrown into the Euphrates tied with weights. Surviving meant innocence, drowning meant guilt. Priests believed the river goddess would protect the truthful. Some victims fought desperately before sinking under the current, lungs burning as mud filled their mouths. Families watched helplessly from the banks. Even if someone survived, they often emerged half dead, injured, or swept miles away. Justice became a gamble against nature where survival replaced evidence as the ultimate verdict. During medieval Spain's harsher periods, horse-tearing punished regicides and traitors. Limbs were tied to 4 powerful horses facing opposite directions. At a signal, riders whipped the animals, forcing them to sprint outward and rip the body apart. Tendons snapped first, then joints dislocated, followed by the brutal tearing of skin and muscle. Eyewitness accounts describe the ground soaked in blood as pieces of the victim scattered. This method wasn't simply execution. It was symbolic dismemberment of someone who had torn the kingdom's unity. In ancient Scandinavia, drowning in marshes punished witches and oath-breakers. Victims were bound to wooden poles driven into bogs, then slowly submerged as tides rose. Cold water tightened around the body, shock setting in long before lungs failed. Some were left partially submerged for hours, enduring insects, freezing temperatures, and the steady rise of water. The marsh was believed to be a spiritual boundary, so drowning there symbolized banishment from both the human world and the gods. Death came silently, swallowed by mud. In Ottoman Turkey, bamboo impalement involved planting sharpened bamboo shoots beneath restrained prisoners. As the plant grew, sometimes inches per day, it pierced the body slowly, driven upward by natural pressure. The victim's own weight contributed to the penetration. Travelers wrote of screams echoing through forests as bamboo emerged through the back or chest days later. This method turned nature into executioner, transforming patience, sunlight, and growth into instruments of suffering. It demonstrated how cruelty could be engineered through biology instead of weapons. In medieval Scotland, barrel drowning, or witch's barrel, placed accused witches into sealed wooden barrels with spikes inside. The barrel was rolled downhill into lakes or rivers, tearing flesh as victims tumbled violently before sinking. By the time water entered, most were already bleeding or unconscious. Locals believed the violent spinning exposed hidden demons. The execution blended superstition with brutality, punishment delivered through wood, water, metal, and fear. The splintering echoes of rolling barrels became a nightmarish symbol of Scotland's witch panic. Ancient Mayans practiced demonstration sacrifice, dropping prisoners into sacred cenotes, deep natural sinkholes believed to be gateways to gods. Victims were thrown bound, hitting water from great heights, breaking bones on impact. Some survived the fall only to drown slowly in darkness. Archaeologists found skeletons with cut marks, suggesting some were retrieved and sacrificed again on altars. Ritual chants echoed around the limestone walls, while water swallowed the condemned, creating a haunting blend of religious devotion and unforgiving natural violence. In certain African kingdoms, ant execution punished political rebels. The victim was tied over an anthill filled with aggressive biting ants. Honey or sap was smeared on the body to provoke swarms, which attacked eyes, lips, and wounds. Some ants crawled into orifices, delivering venomous bites that caused swelling, fever, and hallucinations. Death could take hours or days. The method symbolized nature reclaiming those who threatened the kingdom, returning traitors to the earth in the most agonizing, devouring way possible. In medieval Italy, the garrote strangled criminals using a metal collar tightened by a screw. Victims were seated in a chair, their neck locked into an iron ring. As the executioner turned the handle, the collar crushed the trachea and snapped vertebrae. Some were given a swift twist as mercy, others endured slow suffocation. Public executions drew crowds who watched the condemned's face darken and eyes bulge. The garrote blurred the line between torture and execution, delivering death through mechanical, controlled pressure. In ancient Mesopotamia, wall crushing punished rebels by pressing them against stone barriers using heavy wooden beams pushed by soldiers. The force slowly compacted ribs, spine, and organs until the victim could no longer breathe. Scribes noted that rulers favored this method because it required no blades or fire, only manpower and stone. Some victims were interrogated mid-crushing, their voices strained as pressure increased. It symbolized the state literally crushing rebellion, merging physical destruction with political messaging carved into public memory.